Is it possible that I own my 1980 Piper Archer II and it costs me $0 to own it? Yes, and I'll tell you how today.
It's kind of badass, huh? Works well, that is.
Hey guys, Mike Webb here. I did a video about if you own an airplane and you want to find a good way to offset some of the costs of ownership. If you haven't seen that video, go ahead and click right here and you can catch up on that discussion. Okay, in the other video, I said that I was going to go into details about how the leaseback arrangement has worked for me and allows me to own my plane for free, including all the detailed numbers. So, here we go. Okay, the first part of this discussion is to review how the costs of ownership in an airplane are broken down. We have fixed and variable costs. Now for fixed costs, an example would be insurance, storage, whether it's a hangar or a tie-down, database updates, taxes, fees, and of course our annual inspection. Some people pay cash for an airplane, other people take out a loan. Your mileage may vary. The important thing to remember about fixed costs is that they're the same whether you fly 1,000 hours in a year or 1 hour a year. Okay, so now that we've talked about fixed costs, let's talk about variable costs of ownership. We're looking at things like the fuel burn per hour, the cost of fuel that you're putting into your airplane, and therefore we can determine the fuel cost per hour to operate your airplane, the oil cost per hour, the maintenance cost per hour, an hourly engine reserve, and a prop reserve. Combined with fixed costs, variable costs go into calculating your operating cost per hour. Overall expenses go up the more your aircraft is flown, but your overall operating costs go down. And this is really important when considering looking at a successful leaseback. Okay, so let's talk about my totals, my numbers that I promised I would talk about. Okay, for my airplane, which is a 1980 Piper Archer II, I have an annual insurance policy of $4,500. Now before you guys all freak out, I get it. That is a heck of a lot more expensive than it would be if I just was insuring it for my personal use. In fact, I got a quote that if it was just my personal plane for only personal purposes, it would be less than $700 a year. But, and this should come as no surprise to anybody, when you have an aircraft on an insurance policy that's used for training at a flight school or an FBO, the insurance company is going to jack up that rate a lot. And in this instance, it was more than 6 times more expensive to have insurance. Now for me, I'm at an airport where I can't get a hangar. I've been on the wait list for over 1.5 years, 2 years now. And so instead, what I do is I have to tie down my airplane, and my tie down at my airport runs $80 a month or $960 a year. Coincidentally, when a hangar spot does open up for me, that hangar is going to cost anywhere from $385 a month up to $425 a month at my local airport. That's approximately $5,100 a year just in storage. But again, right now I just have it on tie down and that's okay for the time being. Now I also have database updates for the GTN 650 that's in my airplane. That comes out to about $600 a year depending on your subscription. Mine's actually $650 a year. I have fees, registration fees in the state of Virginia, that's $10 a year roughly. The annual inspection on my airplane usually runs around $1,500. Now obviously that can vary from year to year, but for me the average is about $1,500 a year. If you're handy and you're able to do an owner-assisted annual or even do the entire annual yourself if you're an A&P or an IA, well then these costs can go down a lot. So overall, my total fixed costs for my airplane are approximately $7,470 a year. Okay, now let's talk about my variable costs of ownership. The fuel burn rate on my Archer for cruise settings is around supposedly 10 gallons an hour. I actually factor in 7.5 gallons per hour, and I'll explain why in a minute. Cost per gallon of fuel at my airport for 100 low lead is usually right around $5.30 a gallon. So my fuel cost per hour is approximately $39.68, or let's just round that up to $40 an hour. My oil cost per hour that I factor in is about $1 an hour. Maintenance per hour, I factor in $17 an hour. Engine reserve is $15 an hour, and the prop reserve is $1.30 an hour. That gives me a total variable expenses of $73.98 per hour. Now all of these numbers were estimated by me in the beginning, but I can say that looking back on an entire 1.5 years worth of data, these numbers are pretty darn accurate. Okay, so now that we've talked about my specific costs, let's talk about my specific agreement with my leaseback partner. In general, your agreement with your leaseback partner has several things in it that can be negotiated. Typically, a specific percentage of the rental rate they keep as a commission, and you get to keep the rest. But there are other types of arrangements out there where they guarantee a certain number of minimum hours are going to be paid to you every month, and they keep the rest after that, or you get to keep a certain percentage of any hours that go beyond that minimum. And they'll pay you that minimum whether the aircraft flies or not. The point is, there's a lot of different situations out there, and it can vary quite a bit. In my situation, which is a pretty standard one, they keep 20% of the rental rate and I get the remaining 80% of the revenue. So if I charge $149 an hour to rent my plane, they keep $29.80 and I get the rest, or $119.20 for every hour flown. So when you subtract the $73.98, or let's just say $74 in variable expenses, or what I like to say is the actual operating cost of my airplane, that leaves me with $45 for each hour flown. And that includes setting aside money for the engine, maintenance, and prop reserves. Okay, so here's the fun part. I said in my other video that having a successful leaseback with your airplane means that you can essentially own the airplane for free and maybe even make some money. And that has certainly been the case for me. So let's see with my actual numbers how many hours my airplane needs to fly for this to work out. I mentioned earlier that everybody's situation is unique with regards to having a loan or a payment on their airplane or whether they own the airplane outright. I'm talking about my numbers here, so I'll be completely transparent and give you all of my real numbers. I did take a loan out for this airplane because I just didn't have enough cash lying around to buy an airplane with it. So, including my loan payments, which come out to about $6,600 a year, and combining that with my earlier discussed annual fixed costs, which again includes insurance, annual inspection, database updates, storage, taxes and fees, my plane needs to rent for 316 hours at my profit of $45 an hour to break even. Now, does that sound like a lot of hours to you? You know, they say the average pilot flies about 100 hours a year. I've personally flown more than 300 hours in my first 2 years or so of pilot training. And they weren't all in this plane, but certainly a lot of them were. And here's the part. I was absolutely not the only one flying my airplane. So I'm happy to say that my airplane flew way more than the 316 hours it needed to break even. In fact, it flew more than that in less than 3 of my best months. It cost me $0 to own my airplane. Any hours flown beyond that are basically just paying me for my time in my own airplane. But it gets better. Because my plane was the right fit for the needs of my flight school, it flew a lot, like 685 hours a lot. So, not only did I own the airplane for free, I flew all of my hours last year for free, and the avionics upgrades that I did and that I referred to in my previous video, all of those costs were recouped. And after all was said and done, I even had money left over so that I could invest in additional airplanes for this leaseback business. But I'll do another video in the future to talk about that some more. It's also worth noting that if you own your airplane outright and don't make loan payments, you'll be in the black with even fewer hours than we're talking about here. Now I can guess what several of you are thinking right now. Whoa, at that rate of usage, you're gonna be coming up on TBO real quick. Or, man, with that many people renting and training in your airplane, it's gonna get really beat up real quick. Well, the truth is, I'm setting aside all the money I need for maintenance reserves, engine reserves, prop reserves, all of those things, but when it comes time to do it, I don't necessarily have to spend that money and overhaul the engine. There's no rule that says I have to do that. I could just be done with it, sell the plane, and move on my way. But that is not my plan currently because the plane is clearly a winner for me at this location, and I'm just going to ride this on. As for the wear and tear thing, because it's at a Part 61 and 141 flight school, the maintenance is held to very high standards, and the mechanics are looking at it on a very regular basis for all the 50-hour or 100-hour inspections. And because of that, the costs are kept relatively low because if things are broken, they fix it right away. In other words, maintenance doesn't get deferred and run out of whack and become super expensive. Yes, some old, brittle plastics that have been in the airplane since 1980, some of those have broken, some of those have cracked after all this usage. And yes, I've had to replace a battery or so because people leave the master on when they get out of the plane. These are costs of doing business, and although I prefer that they wouldn't be there, that's just part of it. And as I said earlier, nothing worth doing is easy. Here's an important insider tip. With a leaseback, since you're talking about charging the renters and the students Hobbs time, but you generally keep track of things with tack time, that difference needs to be accounted for in your calculations. Maintenance is scheduled based on tack hours, not Hobbs time. This is something that's not generally realized at first until you dig a little bit deeper. And the good news is this generally works in your favor as the owner. I find that with my Archer, the tack time is 70 to 72% of the overall Hobbs time. And here's a pro tip. With some of these newer digital tacks, some of them don't even start recording your tack time until the RPM is 900 or above. That can keep your maintenance intervals a bit longer between them, which leads to less frequent maintenance, which leads to less downtime, which, as discussed in my previous video, is your biggest enemy when trying to make money on a leaseback. And, well, frankly, it's the biggest nemesis of anybody trying to make money in aviation. Just ask the airlines. So the bottom line, guys, here is that, as I've shown you now with my exact numbers, this leaseback agreement with me on my Arch has been a very nice success for me, to the point where I can own my airplane for $0 a year. I can fly all the hours I want in my airplane for free because the revenue from the leaseback is paying for that time. And I've even been able to make improvements to the airplane, which were then paid for from the profit. So there you go. I promised I would let you guys know how my actual numbers have worked out in my leaseback agreement. Clearly, this is just an illustration of my specific experience, but the bottom line is that if you've been considering doing something like this, please take my video here as an example of how it can work for you if, again, you have the right plane at the right place. It's all about the good fit. Leave me a comment below if you have any questions about this, or if you want to hear any more about what I've been talking about. I'll be making more videos about my specific experience with this plane and with the others, and the avionics upgrades that I did, because let's be honest, the more information that's out there, the better. If you want to make an informed decision, as I did, any of this kind of stuff should hopefully really help you. And finally, guys, if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel. Let me know what you'd like to hear and see from me in the future. And until the next time, don't fly too low or too slow.